Hey there lads, it's me TheTacticalBrit, your home of breakdowns, in-depth guides and everything in between, and today I want to talk about something that I noticed in the Call of Duty beta, which I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye out in the second run during Xbox and PC and of course PlayStation 4 again, but this was something that I felt was a little bit concerning. Now this is all revolving around skill-based matchmaking. Now for those of you who don't know what that is, skill-based matchmaking effectively tries to match you with players of a similar caliber to yourself in the hope of creating more competitive games. Now there are some pros and cons to skill-based matchmaking which I'm going to talk about, but I'm going to explain why in this specific situation in Modern Warfare this might not be a great idea. Now, one quick disclaimer before I dive into this. This technically isn't confirmed. There is no announcement from Call of Duty. There has been some sort of semi-testing from some people, but it hasn't been, 100% explicit. But from my own experience of playing throughout the entire weekend, I can safely say the better I played, the more I was put into lobbies where there were more skillful players, and then all of a sudden I was in lobbies where basically no one was breaking a 1 KD just purely because like everybody was on par with each other, and it felt to me as though every time I had like a 30 bomb game or a 25 bomb game, I was being put up a caliber, and I was being forced into this sort of playlist with higher caliber players like myself, which created a super sweaty environment for playing the game. Kind of like the 2v2 alpha, but just on a grander scale for these larger modes. So let's dive into this, let's talk about it, and let's see what's going on. So what are the pros of skill-based matchmaking? Well, effectively it matches players of a similar level together, and in theory that should make it more accessible. Now, if you're a slightly lower skill player, or you're not, as hardcore as some of the other people, it means that you're not going to be getting stomped on every single game that you play. However, on the flip end of that, if you're a really good player, you're going to be playing against other really good players, and you're going to find yourself in a very intense scenario. Now, it's a pretty good pro in the sense that it definitely keeps things relatively balanced and even. It very much makes it more difficult for somebody to be like a breakaway 50-0 kind of player, but at the same token, what it does allow for is more balanced matchmaking, and some of the smaller guys or some of the guys who are getting into things aren't being as heavily punished. The typical argument for this is that it keeps up player retention because people aren't being completely stomped on every single game, and it doesn't make for necessarily the best experience for everybody, but it makes sure that some players aren't just being completely destroyed every time they play. Now that makes sense in a Call of Duty sense because a lot of people do just flick on Call of Duty every now and again. There are a large majority of players that aren't consistent players, that aren't, day-to-day players that are gonna, wreck face. They're just, guys who are sitting down on the sofa, they just want to have a casual game, and that's cool. That's totally a normal thing. It's not to alienate people or say, no, how dare these people try and play this game. That's not the case. It's just this is the method that they happen to use. But where do the cons come in? Now, there are some pretty big cons to this, and some of them I definitely felt as though I experienced across the weekend. You get more inconsistent netcode because it's likely that because you're matching primarily with skill, it means that you aren't necessarily always matching with the local players around you. And because of that, what typically tends to happen is it searches for people in a much wider bracket. I think you can see it sometimes because my matchmaking when I was playing actually was taking longer, and it was started doing things like, okay, well now we're searching for a game with, less than 80 ping, less than 90 ping. And I realized this the more I played. The more I played the game, and the better I got, seemingly the matchmaking was taking longer to find games, and I was in higher ping games with less consistent gunplay. That's something I definitely felt as though I noticed. Again, there is no announcement or scientific proof to say that this is 100% confirmed, but from my experiences alone, I felt as though this was definitely true. So ironically, you're matching sort of higher skill players together, but you're also matching them together in a less, competitive environment, in the sense that the netcode isn't as strong as it theoretically could be. Now, the reason I say that I feel as though this exists is because this was an open beta at one point. It was early access to start with, but by the sort of mid-section when every PlayStation 4 player could play it without even needing PlayStation Plus, there was no way that I should have been in the lobbies I was in. I was playing against guys who were jump shotting, drop shotting, players who were, you know, quite frequently using their tactical and lethal grenades to flush me out. People who knew what they were doing. They were playing objectives really well, and, you know, sometimes it was quite frustrating because I was like, oh fuck, you know, screw that shit. But on the flip side of things, it actually was just purely a case of these guys were playing well and I had to play as well as them. So where does the bad side come in? What is the downside to this? Now, if you're a better player, you find yourself in a situation where you're just in a purely sweat environment. Now, think something like Rainbow Six Siege. You're always playing against people of a similar caliber, be it gold, silver, platinum, whatever. Now, what skill-based matchmaking effectively does, if you're a player of sort of the level I thought I was playing at, and again, this isn't just like some weird flex, you know, I felt like I had a pretty good beta weekend. My live stream started off a bit slow, but eventually I got there and some of the gameplay got really solid for me, and I felt like I was playing really well. I felt like I was playing sort of at a semi-competitive level. I was pushing objectives well, I was managing engagements well, and it was almost as though I was playing in a diamond or platinum bracket for Rainbow Six in every single lobby. Like, everybody was of similar caliber to me. There were very few times where I was up against people where I was like, that guy's okay, that guy's bad, that guy sucked. It's like, no, these guys know what they're doing. A lot of them were even watching flanking routes. Like, you don't get that in lower level lobbies. There were guys who were literally covering like entry points and shit. Like, that's the kind of stuff that doesn't happen in some of the open, more less matchmake lobbies that you see around you. And I really do feel as though the issue arises here where you're putting me, a player who's probably, yeah, sure, maybe of a smaller bracket or a small percentage or a smaller area of the population, but what you're effectively doing is forcing me into a constant sweaty environment. And there are going to be players as well who aren't as skilled as I am, but are also matching with players of similar skill. So let's say I'm like a, I don't know, let's say a B+. The guy below me who's also B is playing against Bs. The guy who's on a C is playing against Cs. The guys who are on A are playing against As. And it just means that you get these gridlock lobbies where nobody actually really does very well. In some of the gameplay that you might see on screen, but a lot of it I just haven't put on YouTube because it just wasn't good enough in my opinion to actually be in a video. It was just these super hardcore lobbies, and it was just situations where nobody was breaking the KD that I felt was a respectable one. You know, I think 1 KD in an objective-based game mode is fine, but, you know, you want to be hitting 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, you know, you want to be in the large numbers. And when I first started off, there was a game where I just got the M4A1 and custom classes. I had like a, I think it was something ridiculous, like a 52-3 game. So it all felt a little bit mad, and there are some downsides, of course. You're in this constant sweat fest, which can actually put you off of playing the game. Like, you know, it's kind of like playing Ultimate Team on FIFA or Madden, or like, I don't know if NBA has the equivalent now, and just having like, playing against like an all-legendary team over and over and over again, and sometimes that can really put you down in terms of what you're kind of there for, because you want to enjoy yourself. Like, I'm not saying I didn't enjoy myself, but there was certainly a lot of games where I was like, shit man, you know, this is, do I try switch lobby? Like, you know, this is getting quite tough, you know, and that's not in a bad way. I'm not saying that competition's the worst, but I'm saying in public lobbies, I don't want that level of intensity. I choose competitive playlists when I want to play at that level of intensity, and that's something that I certainly think matters. Now, why do I feel this personally exists? Now, I've mentioned the stuff with the lobbies before and etc, etc, but what really stood out to me was this. I recently went to a Call of Duty event with Twitter. This was just like a Call of Duty Twitter beta party kind of thing, and there were stations there. Now, when I went to this party, I was kind of just sort of breaking into the competitive ranks, or the more hardcore and more intense lobbies before I attended, because I was in London with my PlayStation playing around, and I noticed that things were getting a little bit tough. So I go to this party, and bearing in mind a lot of these guys are YouTubers, some of them are, you know, football players, musicians, whatever, but they weren't dumb, they weren't like horrible at the game. But I was going like 56-4, 45-3, like 50-1. Suddenly, I was just absolutely destroying everybody. And then I got back home the next day, and I played it again. And I was like, wait, what? Like, now I'm, you know, 1.2 KD because I'm in this super intense lobby, and it seemed very abundantly clear to me that I was in a skill-based matchmaking system, and it showed because matchmaking was taking longer and putting me into higher ping games with less consistent gunplay. And what really kind of concerned me was that even in the intense lobbies that I felt were quite intense, when I performed well in those, I even got into even more intense lobbies. Like the next game, I got like scrambled into a next lobby, and it was even harder than that. And I think this really showed when the realism playlist came out, because I jumped into the realism playlist, which I presume would probably have a separate skill-based matchmaking ranking system, just because it's a different playlist with a different rule set, kind of like you would switch ranked and, you know, base game. And when I went into there, I was suddenly murdering people left, right, and center. But after a few games there, again, all of a sudden, I was in lobbies that were a bit more intense. Now, again, there's so much back and forth about whether or not this is a good way to do things. I personally advocate that for public lobbies and public matches, this isn't the way to do it. I would much rather have this in the ranking system and leave it there. Maybe they are testing it for their ranking system, I'm not sure. It could just be a byproduct of the beta, checking if statistics and things like that are working. But in public lobbies, you don't really want to have games where you're just constantly in this serious sweat fest. It's a bit like if you're playing Rocket League, you know, if you go on like a public Rocket League game, you're just sort of there for banner. If you go on a competitive Rocket League there game, you know, you're sitting forward in your seat, you got your big boy headset on, you're chatting with the lads. And I kind of feel like that's the distinction I want here. And I personally advocate, you know, if you're worried about new players, do a separate playlist. Do like a level 0 to 20 or 0 to 15 or whatever, and just get them acquainted with things. And then once people are out of that level rank, they can't go back in. There are lots of things that you can do. You can introduce things like tutorial modes, shooting ranges, explaining stuff. This is all kind of issues that I think we've seen in a lot of first-person shooters, especially things like Battlefield, and even more especially in games like Squad, where, you know, we're talking about a less accessible milsim. Now, Squad actually recently introduced a training range and actually fully explained how the game works. I just feel as though if you're going to be taking a new direction on Call of Duty, don't punish players who are trying to play consistently. Give people an opportunity to learn, give them space and room in a different playlist, and then let it see how it goes. Because if you're not matchmaking them with, you know, the same people who have a similar caliber, some games they're going to have like absolutely stomped on, but other games they're going to be the people stomping on others. And I really feel as though that's just kind of the way you want it to be. Anywho, folks, that's about it from me today in the Tactical Brit. Let me know what you think. Did you have any similar opinions? Now, I do want to point out that I want you to disregard everything you've heard in this video when you make the comment as to whether or not you've experienced this. Don't think about anything I've had to say. Just think about your experiences independently and say, did you notice anything getting different or harder or changing? And then let me know. Like, don't just sort of agree with me straight off the bat because I know you had like 2 bad games. Just, did you notice something? Did you feel something? As always, thank you for watching, lads. It's been me, the Tactical Brit. I'll catch you in another video.